Hi, this is Max Henry here in California in Lumina's new office in Campbell. I'm very pleased to have the chance to present the Analytica Cloud Player today. I'm showing my own face here, usually as a start, but I will shortly close that and we'll go to the screen. Just waiting for people to join us. It looks like we have a pretty good turnout today. So for those of you that are not very familiar with Analytica Cloud Player, it's a way to make your Analytica model that you've built in Analytica on your Windows desktop to upload it almost instantly onto the web so that you and other people can run the model through any web browser without anybody having to download software to their own machine. So I think as we, before we get into this, I'd like to do an experiment, which is actually just to run a poll to see what kind of background you have. I believe there are some people that haven't used Analytica yet and others that are rather experienced. So Marie, if you could just send this poll out to people, and if you could just answer which of these questions applies to you, and this will give me more of an idea of who I'm addressing, and we'll just give you another 10 seconds to apply the poll. So can everybody see the poll results, Marie? Can all attendees see the poll results?
Yes, they should be able to see it in their dashboard.
Okay, you can open up the poll. What I'm seeing is that right now there's nobody who's never used Analytica. Somewhere between 30 and 40% have used Analytica Free 101, which incidentally does come with ACP, so you can actually try out ACP even with the free version. And about 20%, 17% have not yet used ACP to have a paid version of Analytica. 25% use the individual ACP account, and 25% use the group account. And I'll talk a little bit more about those in a moment. So at this point, I will start up the screen here, and we're going to start up a simple market model. This is a standard model that we actually distribute with Analytica, so as one of the example models. So this is just running on my Windows desktop at the moment, and it's, for those of you that haven't seen it, I'm not going to go into a lot of details, but it's a model to evaluate the value to a company for a proposed new product, which has some kind of life cycle. The market, we think there's an overall market size, which is uncertain. Put a normal distribution on that. It starts up over 3 years as a mature phase for a couple of years, and then it declines over 5 years. All these are parameters, of course, that we can change. And we're interested in a couple of decisions. The price relative to our competitor, our average competitor for the similar product is about $1,500, and we can change the price from equaling it. So one means we're going to match the competitor price or a lower price or a high price. There's also a decision about marketing budget. We don't really care too much about the details of this model, but it's useful to kind of look at an example. And we can look at cash flow over time. That's one of the outputs here. And I'm going to switch off my webcam for the moment to avoid distracting you. And this is showing revenue in red, cost in blue, and net in green over time. It starts out negative while we're investing. gradually as sales increase, we start getting positive and so on. And then there's a net present value over that at a specified discount rate of 15%. We made that uncertain because a bunch of the inputs are uncertain, and we do an importance analysis, which is, for those of you not familiar, it's kind of a way of asking, given all the uncertain inputs in this model, which ones are most important to the results. So we can upload this into Analytica Cloud Player almost instantly. So we go into the File menu that you see here and simply select Publish to Cloud.
Is the milk still good to drink if it's got like a little solidish part on the top?
Sorry, is somebody has a question for me, or they just mute themselves? Okay, so we can click Publish to Cloud here, and it goes into this dialog here. Says Publish Model, the ACP model name. That's the name of my original Analytica model. I can change it to give it a new name when it's in ACP, and I can say what I want it to do after it opens in ACP. You can just open the model folder page that lists the models, or actually I'm just going to want to open the model directly in ACP. So I click Publish, and it's uploading it. It's opening up my browser, and it's showing this model now within the browser. So this is the same model, but in ACP, and it looks remarkably similar to what it did on running on the desktop. There's kind of an outline view here. I can open up the model details, see the modules here. I can click on the model details here, let's say, and it will show the underlying influence diagram that looks pretty similar to an Analytica. And I can, one difference here is that on the web version, a single click, it does, for example, if you want to open a module, I just single click on the costs module and I see the diagram of the costs module. Whereas in Analytica, it would be a double click. I can click on, let's say, this variable here, and it immediately shows a graph. And as in Analytica, we can look at the graph, the table view with the numbers over time, the object view with the various attributes of this object, the title, description, definition, inputs and outputs, all the stuff that you're used to within Analytica on the desktop. And I can even navigate around the model by clicking on inputs, let's say, as I can in Analytica. Or I can go back to its diagram, and this will take me up to the parent diagram. And so this is kind of a really convenient way when you have an Analytica model, you want to share it with other people to review it. You probably know a little bit about Analytica because, you know, they need to sort of understand the basics. This would be for other modelers or reviewers. But what we found is that if you want to create a model that really works well in a web app, you probably want to modify the user interface a little bit. So going back to the Analytica model on my desktop here, so we have a library that allows us to modify various elements of the UI to work better on the web. It's not required to do this, but sort of recommend it. So I've gone down into the model details module, and I'm going to add in should go into edit mode, and I'm going to add in a library called ACP Style Library that helps me select styles that work well on the web. And you can just add this from your library. Here's the ACP Style Library. But since Karen, Lee, and I have been modifying it a bit, I'm going to use a slightly updated version of it that happens to be, so I'm going to use add module here for my demo. So I'm going to use this module. Says embed or link. Whenever you add a module library, this dialog comes up. I'm just going to embed it. So I click OK. And this new module comes up. For those of you who haven't seen it, a library has this sort of arrow tail shaped like the functions inside it. And when I open it up, it has these three buttons which allow me to modify the navigation styles, node styles, and frame nodes. And we'll go through each of these. So first, navigation styles. So right now, we're using the default style, which is called Analytica Model Review, which basically is a lot like Analytica on the desktop. But I want to actually make this into a web application. So I'm going to select that view. And the web application view allows you to, instead to have each module from the top level becomes a tab and can be accessed through a tab-based interface. So you'll see in this preview what it might look like. There's a couple of tabs. And in fact, I want to use the top level diagram as a tab. So what that means is that when I open this model in ACP, the first thing that users will see is this view here. Okay? And we'll talk about some of the other options now, but just to illustrate, I'm going to publish this to the cloud so we can see what that looks like. And it comes up with a little dialog saying I already have a model. So now you see this model, but it only has two tabs, the main one and the model details. I'd actually like to make these into tabs as well. So I can do that going back to the pricing model. So basically, it decides that any module in the top-level model will be accessible as a tab. So I'd like cost these three modules to be tabs at the top level. So one thing I could do is just move these into the top level, but that would mess up my diagram. So I'm going to make these aliases of these modules, go into the Object menu, and select Make Alias. So an alias, many of you might be familiar with an alias of a node. You can also make an alias of a module. And it creates these aliases with italics to show that they're aliases. And I'm just copying them into this diagram. And I'm going to arrange them like this. It doesn't really matter. But the order of the tabs in ACP is the order of the modules going left to right or top to bottom. So now we expect it to have model details, cost, sales, and market size as tabs. So let's check and see if that's the case. So we publish to cloud again, and while it's loading, it gives me this little dialog, alert starting a new model. Appears you're already playing a model. So this is just to make sure I don't accidentally overwrite it, but I do want to overwrite it in this case, so I click yes, and it will start the new model. And now you see we've got these different tabs. There's the model details, the costs, sales, revenue, and market size. So, so this is slightly more accessible. Okay, now we're going to do a second thing, which is really extremely helpful for when you're creating ACP models, and that is to create a frame node. And basically, what a frame node is, and you can see description of frame nodes when you open up this module in the ACP style library. A frame node is actually a text node set up in such a way that it displays a graph or table embedded in your diagram view. So you'll see I've expanded the width of this diagram view, and I'm going to create a a text node, and I'll give it a title, frame node for results. And this is just to remind me this is a frame node. And I'm going to set the node style to fill and border. So that's not essential, but it's nice so I can see it. And I'm going to expand it to fill, to give me a reasonable amount of space to show graphs and tables. And okay, now the next thing is I do need to tell it that this is intended as a frame node, and I want to show so that I can show results on it. So I go into the frame node module, and it says first I need to select a module. So this is the main market pricing model. So I select that at the top. This just lists the modules in my model. So I select that, and then it finds the text nodes in my model, and you'll see this has each of these things as a text node I'm using to group inputs and outputs. But the one that I want to make into a frame node is this last one that I labeled frame nodes for results. So I select that, then I just check this box, select as a frame node, and then a whole bunch of options show up at the bottom for setting the styles of this frame node. I can decide, so the frame node is going to show the results of each variable that I select, and you have various options. You can show the index menus. These are the usual pivoter or slicer things. I'm actually not going to show them in this case. You can show the description of the module, of the variable at the top, which I will show, and how much space in that thing the description should take. Otherwise, if it's longer than that, it'll just put it in give a scroll bar. I'm going to select 20%. And then I can select whether to show it as a table or a graph or as last saved in Analytica. So usually you save it last time you viewed it in Analytica. So let's show this. So for example, net present value, I showed it as a graph, as a probability density function. Let's say the cash flow will also show as a graph. There are other options in it. You can say, I only want to look at graphs, I only want to look at tables, or I want to look table and graph. So the top view is graph above table. So ACP allows you to do both. You need a big enough frame node to be able to do that. So I'm just going to leave it as saved in Analytica. And I'm going to do something similar for the model details, so that when we look at this, we can also look at a frame, that is, a result at the same time that we're viewing the diagram. So I'm actually going to make a copy of this frame node for results, and I copy that. I did a right click to get the right click menu, and I'm selecting copy. And then I'm going down here and I'm pasting it in and adjusting its location. Okay. And then I still need to make this into a, tell Analytica that it's a frame node, or rather tell ACP that it's a frame node. So this was the model details. So we're going to now go into this select model details, and this only has one text node called frame node for results. So we check this to tell it that it is indeed a frame node, and probably use the same options as before. So okay, so what will all this do? So now I publish it to the cloud again. and let's see what it looks like this time. So now you see that we've got a much wider screen in ACP. Basically, the size of this is set to be the same size and shape as my top-level diagram, the market pricing model in this case. So this has determined how big it appears in ACP. And this view actually applies to all the subviews. So if we look at, well, first of all, let's now click on, let's say, cash flow. Okay, that broke. Let's look at model details. And now we click net present value, and instead of showing a different window view as it would in the desktop, it actually embeds the result, the density function in this case, right in this frame node that we created. And usually that's a lot more convenient. We can click the importance thing, and that will show the result as we last saved it, which happens to be this bar graph showing the relative importance of these variables here. And we can actually click on any of these things. Price elasticity, well, this is perhaps less interesting, relative price, these are just single numbers, but this is kind of a convenient way to do it. If we look at sales revenue, similar, we can click around here and look at the result value and also the description for each of these things. So it's kind of a convenient way to look around the model. So let me go back to the pricing model. And it looks like the frame node style for the main one kind of got lost, so let me just fix that. Okay, so we've looked at the navigation styles. Let me show you a couple more things about the navigation styles. So we saw that you can have basically Analytica model review, which is a lot like Analytica on the desktop, or web application. And we can, if we have the web application, we can select tabs across the top that we saw, or tabs down the left. So if you have a lot of modules at the top level, and a lot of, which would create a lot of tabs, they often fit better down the left than they do across the top, but it's just a matter of preference. And you can decide whether you want to show the model title at the top. Auto count means that any result will be automatically calculated when you open a window in ACP. So if your model computes pretty fast, that's a better way to do it, because the user doesn't have to click count button as they would in Analytica and wait for a moment. But if the model is very large, takes long to compute, you might not want to do auto count, because that means that people would have to wait a while when they look at a new window. So one other thing here. So one of the things that we found is that selecting the window size in ACP is important. If you are creating a model that you want a lot of other people to use as a web application, you need to think about, well, not just what screen size do I have, my massive screen on my desk is an Analytica model, but what sort of screens will they be using? Maybe on a laptop, maybe even a smaller device, as we'll talk about later. And so you can select one of these standard screen sizes as your kind of minimum resolution that basically design your ACP application to work well on that screen size. But we're going to leave it as custom. So custom just means we will use the size of the main model screen as the screen size for all the other diagrams in your model. So note that you need to think about that. So if you have a model, let's say, that had nodes going down to here, extra node at the bottom. Okay, so that is actually not going to be visible if we're only using this size screen, which might be useful if you don't want it to be visible, but most likely that's not what you want. Excuse me. Okay, and now let's go and look at node styles. So this library lets you, actually, let me just hang on a moment, see if there are any questions here. So in the GoToWebinar app, you can ask questions in the app on the right side of your screen. There haven't been any asked yet, but feel free to ask questions that way, and I'll pause now and again to answer any that may have showed up. Okay. So I'm looking here at the diagram node style in the ACP style. And let's see, there's a little bit of noise. Maybe somebody wants to mute themselves. I think I can hear them typing. Hopefully they're typing the question to me. Okay, so here are the node styles. So Karen Lee, who's our resident designer as well as being an excellent modeler, thinks that these styles are rather ugly, and she probably is right, but I'll just show you what you can do. You can select bevels and shadows and then publish your model to the cloud. And you'll see a style. Oops. Okay. I've got too many of these things open, I think. Okay, let's try that again. And you'll see I put the tabs down the right-hand side. I chose that style instead of across the top. And if we look at the model details, you'll see that the diagram looks a little bit jumping out at you. You can decide whether or not that's really a style that you like. As I said, our resident graphic designer tends to recommend against it. I kind of like the shadows, but without the bevel effect, but it does make things a little more visible. So I showed you, how you can modify your model to work within ACP and create a web application that looks quite a bit easier to use for people that might not be familiar with Analytica. And obviously, you want to, if you're creating a web app for end users, they should not need to know anything about Analytica. And if you want to learn more about the style library, you'll see at the bottom of this library, which is itself an Analytica library, there's a style library. I just clicked on that blue link, and it's taken me into the Analytica wiki for the page on the Analytica style library. And I will say this shows the slightly older version of the style library. It's not that different from what I just showed you, and the new version will be distributed along with Analytica quite shortly. So it shows you how to find the library just by adding it in from Add Library, slightly different layout of the buttons and so on. But basically, all the things that I showed you here are described in more detail. For those of you that are really kind of super geeks on this, I will point out that ACP uses a special Analytica attribute called Cloud Player Styles. And when you use the style library to select different options, it actually puts various codes into the Cloud Player Styles, in this case for the top-level module, that specify the options that you asked for. So it's, at the bottom it's got bevel, node border, yes, node drop, shadow, yes. It's pretty obvious what it's doing. Occasionally you may want to actually edit these styles yourself, but for the most part, if you're using the style library here, you don't really need to. It just does it all for you, so you don't really need to worry about that. We can also go into, this is the main ACP page in the Analytica wiki, a little description of what it is. I thought I might come to show you this table. So just to remind you that even if you have just pre-101, you actually have the ability to use ACP. You can upload Analytica directly into ACP, and it'll give you, I think you have 25 sessions total. I don't even know if that's released, and you can buy additional sessions. This is true if you have pre-101 or you have Analytica with support expired. If you have active support, then you have up to 25 sessions a month free, included with support. And what is a session, you might ask? So a session is essentially one run of a model, but it ends after 20 minutes of inactivity. And there's also a limit on the amount of computation you can do. If you use more than a certain amount of computation, I think it's a CPU minute with these, it goes to a new session. So the point there is that it's not designed, our ACP server is not designed to be, a super power Analytica cruncher out there in the cloud. And if you are using it for a lot of crunching, you might be interfering with other people's enjoyment of ACP. So that's why we put a limit. You can also get a group account. So a group account means that a group of you in your organization can share the account, and you can use it for sharing models between. You can set up multiple projects. Each project has a folder, and each user can be an admin or an author who can upload and share models, or just a reviewer who can look at existing models, and the admin can decide what access each person has. And there's also a premium group account, which provides a lot more sessions, up to 25 users. And I guess we didn't yet put that in here, but one of the key advantages of it, it also gives you access to the optimizer, so you can run optimization models within the premium group account. And for some organizations prefer to host ACP themselves on their own Windows server instead of having Lumina do it. And we do offer a license for ACP server for organizations that want to do that. Sometimes it's because they're concerned about their data, and they have super confidential data on there. They prefer to have their own IT people managing the security. And other times it's just because they want to do a lot of computation, and obviously there's no limit on the amount of computation you can do on it since you're not sharing it with other companies. I realized that I didn't actually show you. I should show you the backend view. So this is my individual account that any of you can get, even with free 101. And these are various versions of the model that I've created or other people have created and saved in that account. And we can also in this account, I can use this to upload another model, and it's just prompting me to give it a model. I won't do that for now, but that's another way to upload a model. Or I can select a model like plane catching decision with EV. That sounds interesting. I'm going to select that, and then I can download that onto my machine and fire it up. So this is now downloading the model from ACP and running it on my local Windows machine. So that's not for end users, but for your collaborators, that may be a very useful thing to do. I can also just delete old models, and then this is kind of cool. I can email an invite. So I'm going to actually, if it's okay with you, I'm going to email you all a copy, an invite to this ACP market model we just created. So I click email invite, and I'm going to go into my demo script model where I actually have got everybody's email address. I hope you won't consider this as spam. And I've copied that, and I'm copying it into here. So basically, I'm inviting you to run Analytica. So this is obviously kind of handy, when you want to share a model. You can share it with anybody. They don't need to know anything about Analytica or have everything on their machine. It just provides a link, and I'll just send the email. So you should all shortly be getting that invite to open this model yourself if you wish. And again, you don't need to have an ACP account. It's just a single link. I can also go into my account here. It tells me I've got 22 session credits remaining. I can buy more here if I want some. I can change my password. And if you have a group account, you can manage multiple accounts and set up projects there. So I'm just going to see if there's any questions showed up here. Yes, we do have a couple of questions. So can you, okay, first question from Andy, sorry, I can't see last names yet. Okay, from Andy Satchwell, can you hide the variable node description and the definition? That's a good question. Well, when you set up the frame node here, you can unclick description, so that will not show the description in the frame node. So if that's what you're asking about, that's relatively easy to do. If you're asking if you can hide it in other places, I mean, then I guess, well, it's kind of a longer answer to that. You can use the information hiding mechanisms in Analytica Enterprise. How powerful are the ACP servers compared to standard PC? Would there be an improvement in speed calculation? Does it vary depending on sessions? From Duncan Kern Turnbull. Thanks, Duncan, for that question. So our ACP servers, the new one is a reasonably powerful server, but I wouldn't really recommend it as if you're finding your own desktop PC isn't powerful enough to do what you want, it's probably not going to be a significant improvement on that, and certainly not with the regular ACP version. If your company wants to do a lot of sort of powerful or a lot of modeling that requires a lot of computation, then running your own ACP server is a good way to do that. So you can run ACP on a superpower server, and when you need something that takes a lot of computation, you can do that, and obviously it becomes a shared resource among all the modelers in your company. So let me go back to the questions here. So, are there any options for collaborative model development on ACP? So, I guess the main use for collaborative model development is uploading models onto the ACP directory, and other people can open them. We don't yet have the ability for multiple people to put comments directly into a model. That would obviously be a nice option, something we're looking at. Then from Troy Dorai, if I'm pronouncing your name correctly, does the 200 megabyte size limit apply to the server version too? Yeah. Let me go back to. So I think, this is a 200 megabyte maximum file size for uploading. I don't think that's a very strict limit. There's no limit on the the RAM usage of a particular application, and I'm not even sure if we need to have that 200 megabyte limit. 200 megabytes is obviously pretty large for a model file. Okay, next questions. Duncan, okay, you already answered this. Troy, Dory, when you update a model, does the ACP version, can I roll it back to a previous version? Well, let's see. I mean, you can do that by saving versions with different names. There's not an automatic way to go back to an earlier version within ACP. And that would be, perhaps a nice feature, not at present. Then Duncan Turnbull, can you copy result tables to Excel or download tables to Excel? Well, actually, that's a great question, and I will be glad to address that. So actually, ACP works pretty nicely with Excel. Let me, so a simple thing that you can do is just copy and paste between close that one and start this one. So you can copy and paste from a table view. I suppose this thing isn't going to have table views. Okay. Let me fire up another one that does. Okay, I guess this one doesn't have one either. We so you can copy and paste from let me try that one. From a table in okay, let me find a different object that has a more interesting result. Let's look at the cash flow, let's say. So I can click this little icon here. Says this has more than 2 dimensions. Do you want to copy just the 2D or get all the data? And so I just fired up Excel and I'm just copying. Oh, that's the wrong thing. I can paste it into here. And what we can also do is upload a model, a spreadsheet into ACP, and you can add buttons into your ACP model to do that. That will then prompt the user to upload a spreadsheet with input data, and you can use the standard Analytica functions just to show you those. So in the Analytica definition menu, I'm showing the application integration library of functions, and these spreadsheet functions, for those of you that aren't familiar, let you open a spreadsheet, read a cell or read a range. You can do a named range, that's often a good way to do it, and use that within your Analytica model. And similarly, you can write set cell or set range, write the value back into a spreadsheet. And you can do that on your desktop, but you can also do that in an ACP, in which case it's reading and writing a spreadsheet within the ACP directory. So when you have large models with a lot of data, that's often a convenient way to go. Okay, I think that was all the questions that we have here. Any other questions? I could show you a couple of examples of other ACP models. Let me just show you tests. So this is a model that we at Lumina helped build for the Electric Power Research Institute for some utilities for evaluating whether or not thermal energy storage would be an economic option for a building. So this is kind of an energy efficiency thing. So it's a set of inputs here. And this shows you one interesting feature that, see, there's a little bit of noise. Okay, thanks. And so we built this for Southern California Edison. And if you create 2 frame nodes on the right here, when you click a result that needs a frame node or even an input table, it will choose the next frame node. So this is handy if you want to compare 2 different graphs that we wanted to here. And then one other application built by Karen Lee here that actually is available on our website. So this is a project that we have been looking at. So if you imagine that many countries in the world impose a carbon tax. It may seem hard to believe that if you live in the United States, but I think personally that is going to be happening quite shortly, with certainly quite a few countries are planning to do it. But one of the hard questions from the Paris climate talks is how can the developed world that has high emissions, and let me just show our emissions per capita. So this graph is showing emissions per capita, and the orange are the high emitting countries and the green are the low emitting countries. And the question is, if we decide on a carbon tax or a cap and trade scheme that puts a price on carbon, how are we going to incentivize the low carbon emitters that haven't emitted much historically and aren't emitting much per capita now to impose some kind of carbon pricing themselves? And so one suggestion that was made by an economist, Stephen Stott, and a few others, is that if you, of the money that's gathered from carbon pricing, let's suppose it is a carbon tax, or it could be by selling emissions credits, emissions permits, some small percentage of that, let's say 10% of that, would be provided to the low-emitting countries in proportion to how much their per capita emissions are below global average emissions. That they only get those funds if, in fact, they sign up to price carbon themselves. So it provides an incentive, a reason for India and Africa, especially, to sign up to pricing carbon. And it turns out what we're exploring with this model is to see, well, what would the cost be to the high-emitting countries, and what would the per green fund receipts per capita be? This is kind of yellow is negative and green is positive. So that's kind of what this model is about, still under development. I thought I'd show it to you partly because of its intrinsic interest, but also because it has this map interface. This is not exactly a standard thing built within ACP, but if any of you wanted to use a map, this is actually using Google Google Gizmo for plotting colors on maps. That's certainly an option. So, are there any final questions or comments? Just looking down here, let's see if there's any more questions. Okay, John Cirucci, if I'm pronouncing that correctly, I like the choropleth map graphic. Is that an Analytica functional? I guess I just answered that. It's not, unfortunately, yet available in Analytica, but if you have a ACP application that wants to use that, we could help you figure out how to make that work. Well, thanks so much to all of you for your attention. Please follow up with us if you have any further questions. Rodrigo Ditborn is asking, is this recorded session going to be available? And I think the answer is yes, it is going to be, it has been recorded, and it will be made available on the ACP, well, on the Analytica wiki along with other recordings. So thanks very much. Cheers.
Thank you. That was great.
Good.